How an organisation is designed has a crucial impact on what it can accomplish. It's therefore an important subject of research and much debate. INSEAD's resident expert in organisation design is Phanish Puranam. He's penned a new book on the subject, The Microstructure of Organizations, that helps readers understand how to design firms and what the new thinking is in this space. Phanish, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here.
So my first question for you is, this is a big subject, but your book has broken it down. What are the key ideas you would put forward that are most relevant to managers and practitioners?
As you say, Chris, this is a very complex topic, and I think precisely because it's so complex, it's useful to have a diversity of perspectives on organization design. The perspective that I'm offering is built around 4 central ideas. I'll go through them very quickly. First, the idea is that when we think of organizations, we have to be very broad-based in our understanding of what an organization is. So to me, an organization is any multi-agent system with a goal, which means a team is an organization, so is a dyad, so is a department, so is a division, a company, or even an ecosystem or a social movement. These are all organizations because they are multi-agent systems with a goal. So what's the point of defining it that broadly? The advantage is once you start thinking about organizations in this very universal way, one comes to realize that every organization, regardless of its scale or size or context, has to solve a few basic fundamental problems. These are the problems of division of labor. How do you break down the goals of the organization into subtasks? And integration of effort, which is how do you integrate back the efforts of the different tasks that have been allocated to different agents in the system. This is universal. Again, it doesn't matter whether we are talking about a strategic alliance or an ecosystem or a company or a department. If it's an organization, which by the first definition it is, it has to solve these 2 problems. The third big idea is that when we think about organization design, very often we obsess about structure. Now, structure is important, there's no doubt about it, but it's only one of the 3 pillars in my view of organization design. The other 2 are sorting, which is the choice about who enters the organization and of course who exits, and decisions around sense making, by which I mean how the members within the organization through mutual interaction form a shared view of their world. You would also think of it as culture if you like, but culture is not the whole part of it. So sorting, structuring and sense making, that's the triad of ideas that together shape design. And the last part of the set of 4 ideas is the notion that structure is fractal. What do I mean by that? Even the most complex organization in the world, whether it's an ABB or a Procter & Gamble or a Deutsche Bank, it may have a very complicated multi-geography, multi-business structure. But if you look carefully at it, it can be broken down into a few recurrent patterns of interaction, which are called microstructures. To give you an example, the microstructure featuring a supervisor and a set of subordinates is a triangle, and that triangular structure recurs both on the shop floor as well as in the boardroom. Now, of course, there are huge contextual differences between shop floors and boardrooms, but there is something about the triangular pattern which is universal. And what my approach is trying to do is to extract those universal features in a way that we can reapply them to different contexts using various tools. Now, this book is of course written primarily for academics, researchers, and people who analyze organizations, including consultants. But I think the implications of these ideas are quite broad-based and will shape, or should shape, I hope, the way managers think about how they design their organizations. So rather than think about organization design as something that's done only in the boardroom and affects the entire company, every manager who runs a team is an organization designer. That's one of the central messages of the book.
And what do you see as some of the biggest transformative changes in the way organizations work compared to the way they have in the past?
So as usual, big changes come from technology and they come from changes in culture and society. In terms of technology, I would point out the changes in terms of automation, the replacement of human capital with machinery and equipment, but also automation of knowledge work, which is exactly where the algorithms and the AI wave is leading us now, where a lot of knowledge work formerly done by individuals and teams can now be automated through the use of algorithms. Clearly, these have big impact on how many employees you need to hire and also how many managers you need to coordinate them. And these 2, of course, together shape the nature of hierarchies. So you may not need as many multi-layered hierarchies if you can do the same output with fewer people and if you can coordinate the same number of people with fewer managers. So both of these effects clearly have some kind of a pressure on hierarchies to become flatter. The other cultural change I'll mention is also an interesting one. On the one hand, there's a lot of discussion about millennials and how they're very different from their preceding generations in their work expectations. I'm not sure we have very strong evidence about this, but it's suggestive that there are big differences. To me, a much more interesting and subtle point is the fact that as gender balance is restored or at least attained, and we see equal numbers of men and women in the workforce, it must be true that the structures we designed in settings where most of the workforce was men will no longer be applicable, or at least less applicable. So some of the changes we should be seeing in organization, I think, will be at the intersection of these two big trends.
I wanted to ask you specifically about in terms of how you see that affecting the way organizations are designed.
In some sense, it's quite fascinating because I've always held that organization, the process of organizing things, is humanity's oldest technology. This is what we first learned how to do as a species, and it acts as a platform technology, if you will, for everything else we've accomplished. Algorithms that we can control and we can compute are probably our newest technology. And interestingly, I think these two are now coming together and interacting with each other in very interesting ways. I see at least three broad ways in which algorithms and organizations come together. First, it's forcing many of us who study organizations for a living to confront the fact that in many ways an organization is an algorithm. It is a set of steps that produces an output, whether it's a product or a service or profit, however abstractly you want to define it. So it's forcing a lot of us to think about what would we design our organizations to look like if we realize that at heart they were really algorithms. And sometimes we can replace the algorithm based on people with one based on technology. In some sense, this is exactly what companies like Uber have done. So they have recreated an organization without the human component, but with an algorithmic component. How widespread this will be, what the implications are for labor markets, for equality, these are big questions, but certainly important ones. We have to address this. A second way in which algorithms and organizations interact is the idea of using algorithms as tools. I think we can do a far better job today of designing organizations than we could have done 15 years ago. In part, it's because we have algorithms to work with data, HR data, performance evaluation data, data on teams, data on social networks. Today, we have the algorithms to analyze this in a very sophisticated way. We didn't have them a decade ago. So algorithms as tools are equally important. And the last piece I'll mention, which is a bit futuristic, you might think of it as sci-fi, is the idea that algorithms might be equal members in human production teams. So one could imagine an investment committee in an investment bank or in a hedge fund or in a venture capitalist context or even in a corporate context where some of the voting members are humans and some are algorithms. And the final decision is one that takes into account the views of both. Right? And these kind of scenarios, I think, are increasingly becoming likely and technologically feasible and will obviously shape the way organizations work.